It is 10 o'clock. It's Lancaster Woodturners coffee hour number 255? I think so. Maybe 56. I'm not sure. It's May 29th today, 2025. My name's John Kelsey. I'll be your moderator as usual. And on the recording, I'm going to post my email address for anybody who stumbles into this video and would like to join us some Thursday morning. We're always here for an hour from 10 to 11. Okay, I'm not seeing a whole lot of hands rushing to get shown up, so I'm going to preempt you today. I have a slideshow I'd like to show you that I've been working on for a while. It'll explain why as it goes. It's a bit of an experiment for me in a lot of ways. I'm going to, I've been doing this for 5 years now, and I've given over the hour to a lot of other guys, and they tell their life stories, and I've never really told mine. So let me see if I can get this one to start, and I'll explain what's up with it. So this is a slideshow that I made after I got a call last fall from Monica Hampton of the Furniture Society telling me I would get their award of distinction for work I did 50 years ago. And I frankly didn't know what the hell she was talking about, and I had to figure it out. And we did a thing in January at the Wood Art Museum in Philadelphia with Mark Spheri, which also caused me to need to, he asked me a lot of questions, and I really didn't know the answer. I couldn't figure out, I didn't know how my own story lined up all in a row. So I'm going to go through it in this slideshow. What did you do in the 20th century, Daddy? And I just want to note that I'm up to 28,800 odd sunrises and still counting. That's not bad for a geezer, I don't think. Let me see. Here's the formal title of the piece for the Furniture Society conference in June, where the theme is "You Are Here." Makers, place, and impact. So I'm considering time and place to being two dimensions of the same question. Okay, so the Furniture Society is giving me this award of distinction, but I'm probably unknown to most of them and maybe to a lot of you too. I'm a woodworker and a woodturner, but I'm not famous. I'm an amateur. I make for my friends and family, and I don't show work or sell it or anything. But I'm a writer and a photographer and an editor, and in the 70s and 80s, I found myself in the middle of a cultural moment in woodworking and furniture making. Here's the narrative arc of how it goes. This shows the award of distinction lands on me for journeyman work I did fully 50 years ago, because in 76, age 30, I became the first editor-in-chief of the then new black and white Fine Woodworking magazine, which I did for almost 10 years. And it was a pre-internet cultural moment that spawned woodworkers, and when woodworkers kind of peeked out of their shops and looked around. And I took my mission as enlarging their viewpoints, maybe cross-pollinating, and maybe in that way I contributed to an upwelling of interest in woodworking and furniture making. Well, that's only one slice of my life. Before that I had an apprenticeship as a journalist and woodworker, and then afterwards I had a business selling books and another business publishing books. And now I'm retired, and I'm mostly doing wood turning and making videos, as you guys know. Let me see. So I was born in northern Alberta, which kind of explains why all these Alberta guys are here. My family lives on both sides of the border, and I have too. I was taken to Vancouver as a small child. And then as a young adult, I moved all over North America, and I landed up in southwestern Connecticut in 1976 and stayed there for 32 years, except for a year in England. And ever since, I've been in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I retired here, age 66. And by the time of the Furniture Society conference in June, I'll be 79. I'll outlive my dad. When I was a kid, everybody made stuff. My grandfather saw a shopsmith in the department store, and he made his own lathe drill press table saw combo out of wood. I remember it had a brass tailstock ram, and it was just a beautiful unit that he made. The stuff he turned with it was kind of clunky, as you can see in the photo, but hey. My mother was a potter and a painter and a teacher. I learned craft practices from my mother. She taught us how to go into the woods and dig clay out of a stream and process it into stuff we could make. And my dad was a printer and a writer and a chess player. He left me this totemic block of Fraser River jade. He was going to carve into it someday, and I'm going to carve into it someday too. I guess my brother was a writer and a woodworker. When I was a kid, everybody made stuff. It wasn't unusual. I went to technical high school. In Vancouver, in Burnaby, I majored in physics and tube-era electronics and woodshop. And Vancouver was a great place to be 21 years old in 1967, the summer of love, and in the next year, at age 22, I went east. When I was a student on campus, Bill Reed was working on campus carving the totemic house poles you can still see today at the Museum of Anthropology. And this enormous sculpture of Raven and the First Men came along later. It's a centerpiece of the museum. My point is that the iconography of the First Nations of the Pacific Northwest is kind of baked into me, and it's always stayed with me. So my apprenticeship in writing and editing began at university. I became editor of the campus 3 times a week newspaper in my senior year at age 20. I'd worked on it every year. We tried to be like a downtown newspaper. But I didn't really learn how words to work until I went to work in the newspaper business for the next 10 years, and I worked all over the place. Everywhere I went, I worked for newspapers. I got married in Toronto in 1969, and we began our family there. My daughter was born in Toronto, and our other 2 children were born later on in Connecticut and in Cleveland. And by the time we were into the early 70s, with the civil rights struggle and burned out cities and assassinations and the Vietnam War and Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon, Watergate, and at work at the Cleveland Plain Dealer computer typesetting and smaller newsrooms, it was a lousy life. I didn't like it. It was time to me to move on and try and find a simpler, more authentic path. I'd been making furniture in the basement, so I thought, hey, maybe I could become a woodworker. At the time, the information landscape was kind of thin. This is pre-internet and pre-YouTube. We had books like Cabinet Making and Millwork by John Fire. I'll never forget the thrill I found one day in '72 when I stumbled into the Encyclopedia of Furniture Making in a little bookshop in Cleveland Heights. And every once in a while, you'd find a book like Tommy Simpson's Fantasy Furniture, which is mostly made of paper mache, paste, and paint. But Tommy's a brilliant guy, and he also got the award of distinction in 2006. And there were only maybe a couple of colleges where you could study woodworking and furniture design. Summer of '74, somebody showed me this poster of Stephen Hogman's work. I was absolutely blown away. I went to Toronto to find this guy, and we became lifelong friends there. And I would say that Stephen Hogman was a major influence on my life. That fall, partly inspired by Hogman, partly by work of Wendell Castles that I'd seen, and partly by, I got to do something, I enrolled as a retread freshman in woodworking and furniture design at the School for American Craftsmen in Rochester. And as it happens, 39 years later, in 2013, Hogman's book on projects, mixed with portfolio photos, it was my last major Wood World book project. I guess I just want to say that Hogman's deep and wide-ranging mind was kind of like nuclear fusion. He was always 30 years ahead of everybody else. And I deeply, deeply mourn his passing in 2023. One of the things my big question at school was how to design, and one of the things I learned from Stephen was the key to designing, at least for me, is drawing and photography and making models. You draw and keep drawing to figure out what you're going to make, and then you draw and photograph how you make it, and then you draw and photograph how it worked out, and then you think and repeat. And I've retained that at the core of my own shop practice to this day. Those are Stephen's drawings on the left and my own on the right. Some of them are pretty tightly measured, and others of them are extremely loose and clumsy, but it doesn't matter. It helps me think. My woodworking apprenticeship consisted of 2 years at the Rochester Institute of Technology. I made chairs, I made cabinets, I made tables, and I got into wood turning. My teachers were Bill Kaiser, Ian Kirby, Doug Sigler, Craig McCart, and John Brooks, and of course the other students. And I planned to return to Vancouver and open a workshop. But I'm a journalist. I'd kept a binder full of notes and photos showing all the amazing things I'd seen and learned at school. And it was truly a mind-blowing, life-changing experience to find myself in a yeasty place like RIT, and with the visitors who came to the shop and showed slides, and the other students, and the untrammeled opportunity to make stuff, truly life-changing. The other students were quite remarkable. I learned a great deal from them. Howard Werner is shown up here in the upper left. He became a fairly well-known sculptor of wood. David Gross over there became a builder, and I don't know, he did a lot of different things, but he was building this enormous chair called Pegasus A in the senior-based bench room while I was there. Quite remarkable to see that. It was kind of my introduction to what we now might call studio furniture or art furniture. Astonishing to me that anybody would do that much work and that much careful laminate bending to end up with a chair that was, you know, too big to put in any room in your house, but quite a beautiful object. And I think David still has it. David lives in Greenwich, Connecticut, I think. Another big influence on me was Albert Leacoff. Albert visited RIT one afternoon in 1975. He was with Ed Ray selling wood. I was in the workshop turning, and the teachers fobbed him off on me. Here's another wood turner you can talk to. And we turned in adjacent lathes and had a lot of fun, and it was a real hoot. And from Albert, I later learned, did a lot of that kind of thing. And he went on to organize a long series of wood turning events and publications, which ultimately led to the Museum for Art and Wood. What was important to me at the time was that Albert was the hand that had touched the hand, master to apprentice, back to the beginning of time. And the photo shows Albert carefully watching as his teacher, Manny Ares, demonstrated on the lathe. And I'll never forget one of the things that Manny always did. He used his hand as a steady rest, and he'd move his hand over to the cool cast iron of the lathe to cool the palm off, and then he'd put it back on the work to hold the work in place while he chopped it up with his skew. Manny, I think, he made something like 200,000 shaving brush handles for the Royal Air Force when he was in England during World War II. So Manny was a true production turner. And Albert learned to make newel posts from him and balusters and the like. But really the thing I learned here from Albert and from this whole experience of wood turning events was just how much fun it was to get everybody out of the workshop to meet together and share ideas like we do here today and enjoy one another. So Albert was a major influence in my life and thinking. And while I was still at school, I made a very important connection in my life with Paul Roman, who visited looking for material for a magazine he was going to start. He was calling it Cabinet Maker's Journal. He soon renamed it Fine Woodworking. So I hauled out my binder full of notes and slides and sold him stories really for every issue. This is my split turning camel, which was featured in issue number 2. It was made as a class project to build a rocking animal. I made it as a 2-seater out of walnut logs I'd found on a farm out near Scottsville. I wrote something in every issue from then on. The camel, like I say, was in number 2. So that was kind of me putting a marker down about wood turning and also getting my foot into fine woodworking very early on. So in 1976, while I was still at school, I made an enormous lathe out of salvaged parts that come from a barn. It had oak ways, and I built it up with maple blocks so I could swing 39 inches between centers, a whole table if I wanted to. And if I'd gone into the furniture business, I would have gone this direction. I would have made lathe-turned furniture. But I didn't go in the furniture business. But nevertheless, there's a piece I made in 76, and the piece on the lathe with me turning is not that piece, but it's an adjacent piece from that series. I was at the time clamping 4 blocks together and then turning them on two or three axes, rotating each block. It wasn't I guess it is multi-axis. I don't really know quite what you call this kind of work, but anyway, I did a lot of it at the time, and I saw an enormous inside-out turning, and I saw a lot of potential in it. The little table there on the left, that seemed to me, I could carve faces into those things if I was a good carver, but I'm not, so I didn't. But anyway, that was my direction that I didn't take. So by the end of 76, Roman had persuaded me to move to Connecticut, and I became editor of Fine Woodworking in my journeyman years. Fine Woodworking was written and edited by woodworkers for woodworkers, and we hit big in a cultural moment when a lot of people shared my yearning for a simpler, more authentic life. There was a huge thirst to learn, and our mission was to deliver solid, pertinent information and to open up windows and show woodworkers what others were doing. Now, this was all pre-internet. You know, we listed events, we ran classified ads, and we actually answered the reader mail. We tried to foster community, and we had the domain to ourselves. Issue 5 cover is shown here. Wendell Castle allowed me to document his stack lamination process, which I saw as a signal to the emerging community of furniture artists that we were going to go there with you. We were not going to stick with table saw and router. We were going to do all kinds of stuff. If it had to do with wood and furniture and turning, we were going to cover it. Kind of a declaration, I guess. So we had to map the domain. We had to understand what was going on. Where did we fit in this whole thing? I used spreadsheet grids and diagrammatic maps and file cards and Post-its and assembled a magazine written by professionals for an audience of amateurs and beginners. And the workshop was the pivot. You know, whatever you were doing, you had to have a shop and a place to, and wood and tools. And so I understood at the time that had to be the core of the venture, that was the only thing all these people had in common was a workshop or the need for one, and the equipment, and of course wood. And I don't know, everybody has an agenda. I assumed that the Fine Woodworking readers were just like me. They all needed to know joinery and hand tools and machines. And we delivered full technical sequences for furniture elements, boxes, chairs, and tables. But I also made sure we explored foundational skills like frame and panel, mortise and tenon, and old ways. And we dipped into adjacent fields like lutherie and timber frame carpentry, and new techniques like stack lamination and router inlay and laminate bending. I got Jerry Osgood to write a series on how to do laminate bending, like this table of Jerry's that's shown here. Everybody had an axe, and we kind of made room for them all. And I felt throughout those years that we were living in a bubble. We had an opportunity here to do this. The window might slam down at any time. So we had to cram it all in. We kind of tried to pack the magazine tight with 75 dense pages 6 times a year for 10 years. And I notice in later years now, they don't do that at all. They let the articles puff out to 10 pages, and so there's only 3 or 4 of them in an issue. And that, I guess, makes it a whole lot more attractive as a business proposition, but it also makes it a whole lot less dense and varied. My own agenda included wood turning. Roman had featured wood turning on his first cover, and by the time we got around to in 1982, I thought I knew enough to write a major article, a critical discussion with an essay about the turn bowl, which is this is the back cover that went with that. And I actually own 3 of the pieces shown there, which includes one of Giles Gilson's very first polychrome lacquer pieces and a coconut shell by Richard Raffin, and an enormous thick heavy piece by John Nye, which was great. Anyway, my grandfather had introduced me to wood turning. I learned the basics in high school shop. I knew it had enormous furniture and artistic potential. And my own secret agenda, I made sure there was turning in every issue of Fine Woodworking in my time. And we had contributing editors. Roman had signed them up, and it was my job to nurture them and feed them. Andy Marlowe lived in Pennsylvania and York. Great guy. We became good friends. He gave us close. He had touched the hand who touched the hand at the beginning of time, and he was an American traditional furniture maker, so we needed that. Tay Frid gave us a connection to the furniture programs. He'd founded the program at RIT and also at Rhode Island School. Tay was a Dane. He'd come from contemporary Denmark. He had a very, very good education. He connected us to the European tradition. And we had Bruce Hoadley, professor of wood technology at University of Massachusetts. He showed us why wood didn't behave the way we thought about water and wood and wood technology, and wrote this fantastic book, Understanding Wood, which I edited. That is still in print. That I think is still the best book we have about understanding why and how wood behaves as it does. So all the stuff that's shown here is still in print. One of Frid's maxims was design around the construction. You learn how to make stuff, and then you design new stuff using the materials of techniques that you'd already practiced and know. Frid made these three-legged stools in different heights, and he used this three-view drawing that combined side view, top view, and front elevation in one drawing as his example of what he meant by design around the construction and how to display it. And he used these stools as a signature piece to exhibit because Frid was an enormously practical guy. He could pack them in a box and ship them. They shipped easily. They were light. He could just show them anywhere, and that's what he did. My teachers at RIT were from the same lineage. They design around the construction. But we pretty soon met woodworkers from different traditions who followed a different star, design around the material in particular. Krenov and Nakashima, for example. You study the piece of wood and you ask, what would you like me to make of you? And then most pernicious to the traditionalists were people who said, design around the idea and figure it out as you go. And we saw that in Wendell Castle and Gary Bennett and Stephen Hockman's work. And looking back from this distance, yeah, all of it. Let's not be one channel. Let's be yes to all of it. And Fine Woodworking pretty quickly became famous for its illustrations, drawings and photographs knit together to try and make a technical point. And at the time, Rick Mastelli began experimenting with video as well, and we even published book video sets. And this was all before we had computers, so the illustrations were done by pen on paper, if you can imagine. And we did stories about all the great ones. We traveled everywhere to produce stories. Wendell Castle and Tay Frid and George Nakashima and Art Carpenter and lots of others who weren't yet famous. And if you wanted to write for us, we'd probably send an editor to meet with you to help you take great photos and to scope out what else you had tucked away in your workshop and your slide portfolio. Was really fun. It was delicious to meet these guys. A big influence on me at the time was James Krenov. His first book, A Cabinet Maker's Notebook, was published in '76. Hit me right in the gut. Krenov made it okay to slow down, take the time to make it right and lovely and good, and maybe earn your living some other way. Because you weren't going to make it. You weren't going to make it if you took Krenov's approach to building furniture. It took forever, but it sure ended up with some lovely stuff. And Krenov and Jerry Osgood actually established the furniture program in artisanry at Boston University, and Krenov later went on to found the program at College of the Redwoods in Fort Bragg. But we had him early in the magazine. We had him showing us dowel joinery, which nobody would use until Krenov demonstrated how you could use it to make really fine stuff. And he showed us these diminutive showcase cabinets. You can't tell from that photo how small it is, but Krenov probably didn't stand taller than about 5'4". And I would say that cabinet shown is maybe 4 feet tall. Krenov's writing came out as audio tapes that had to be transcribed and distilled. He was really difficult. He was a prickly, mercurial, and meticulous, but he was worth the trouble, as most of these guys were. And we had our amazing readers. In '76, we invited them to send in photos of their best work so we could publish them in a book that we thought we'd repeat every 2 years. And we did repeat it 8 times, but it took more than 20 years to do that. The response was overwhelming and utterly mind-blowing. And so were sales volume figures for that first black and white book, which is shown here. The range of work and the quality of work, we had hoped, but who knew? It was absolutely terrific, and it affirmed what we were doing. It affirmed that there were people out there doing amazing work in every part of the domain. You guys still with me? I'm not seeing any of you because I'm looking at the slideshow, so I don't see the gallery. You
Great,
still there?
we're still here.
We're here. Oh,
Okay. You all right with this?
Terrific, terrific.
Okay, we're going to keep going. They went on to 7 more design books. I think the series ended in '92 and in full color. But that first one was, boy, blew my head wide open. And also was the Carter presidency. We had stagflation. I know when I look back at the magazines, I was quite stunned to discover how many build your own machine projects we'd made. I'm amazed that anybody would try and build their own wood wheel bandsaw or wood bed jointer like this one shown here. And by the middle of the 1980s, conditions improved, and not coincidentally, good quality tools and machines showed up from Asia. So nobody needed to build their own anymore. But for a while there, every issue we had a complicated build your own machine project. Machines and technologies are always at the center of this, you know. Then as now, and professional woodworkers and wood artists often share industrial spaces with bigger, better machines. And in those days, it was always centered on the table saw and the router. And today, CNC machines. And I won't quite ever forget the maker I met last year at the ICFF. I asked her how she'd made this. I thought she'd turned the parts that she had assembled into a chair. And she said, no, I just draw it on my laptop. Then the robot makes it. So there you go. That's where we are. We took some deep dives. Summer '77, the Baltimore lawyer John Alexander showed up in the office. He had a manuscript he wanted to do about making this chair out of green wood. That was our first book. Ton of fun. Alexander wanted to revise it right up to the last minute, and of course we obliged him. Then we developed a little book editorial team alongside, notably with Laura Tringali and Deb Canarella, to coax books like this out of craftsmen. We published Michael Dunbar's Make a Windsor Chair right around the end of my time with Fine Woodworking. Both of them, and I put these here mostly because I have these chairs. I own the Alexander chair that was made as a demo chair for this book, and I own in fact, I'm sitting right now in the Dunbar Green Windsor, continuous arm Windsor that was made for his book. Lovely chair. It's my go-to chair. Another big influence on me was Toshio Odati. I met Toshio around 1980 or 81. He lived nearby. Toshio had been apprenticed in Japan in World War II, trained as a designer after the war, and then sent to America as an ambassador for the new Japan. He was supposed to go home, but he didn't. He stayed on and became better known here for his classic book on Japanese woodworking tools. He's also fairly well known as a regional sculptor, a very good sculptor and artist. I worked with him on a lot of projects in the 80s and 90s. And in fact, he's still alive. He's 94 and he still works. He still goes out to his shop. He lives like a Japanese peasant in his house in Woodbury. But his work is deft and sharp and sure in how he approaches it. And the thing I learned from it is each woodworking tradition is its own system. You know, it has its own tools, its own measuring methods, its own ways of smoothing and cutting the wood. And you can extract one or two things. Each system holds together all by itself, but once you extract stuff, it starts to come apart. The cultural upheaval of the 70s and 80s threw up a lot of new opportunities to show and see contemporary work, and also to sell it. The Renwick Smithsonian Gallery opened in '72 with a show called Woodworks. Freetown and Eames Gallery opened. There were furniture galleries in Manhattan and New York and Philadelphia and California and Boston. For me, all of these were new places to see work and meet makers and new ways of finding new stories. And we began already, though, to experience the struggle of making space for this stuff, to show this stuff in between more basic articles on furniture making. And, you know, I had to recognize that your typical fine woodworking reader was not going to make a table like the one up in the upper right there, or a chair like that stuff. Those were winners in the Young American show, but your home, it wasn't stuff your basement woodworker was going to make. Or maybe they were. We didn't know yet. We, you know, had a lot of front office pressure to kind of keep the magazine on target for the basement amateur woodworker, and at the same time keep track of what's going on in the larger field. So it was a constant tension between those two forces. We sent the staff on the road all the time. There were weekend woodworking marketplaces under a variety of sponsors. We went to those. We went to exhibitions of local work. We visited workshops all over the country. We're still pre-internet, and there's no YouTube. For most woodworkers, these kind of weekend events were pretty the only way you could meet people and see new tools and techniques and get new ideas. So this stuff was really very important in the development of the woodworking field as we know it now. And also, opened up a huge new market for tools and wood, and as you can see from these ads, all from 75, early 70s and 80s, the all kinds of stuff coming to market aimed at our. We had more than 200,000 readers. There was a lot of thirst to get at these people and sell them stuff. For me, it was also a gold mine of new story opportunities, but also, you could see the Japanese and Chinese machinery coming onto the market and completely changed things. And we had the rise of architecture, paint, glass, metal, plastic, color, decoration, negative space, narrative content. Was this art? Was this craft? Who knew? Luxury gewgaws, or was it furniture? Was it luxury gewgaws for the rich, or was it furniture for the masses? There was a lot going on. We struggled to understand it with essays and photo features in every issue. Daring contemporary designs were at the edge of our domain, and while there wasn't anywhere else to see this work, garage woodworkers probably couldn't build it. By the way, architecture, the term that Art Carpenter coined in this 1983 feature, didn't stick, but it was a good try. The term studio furniture didn't come into common use until the mid-90s, and I gather that's falling out of use now too, so who knows. This is a back cover we ran in 1980. This is Gary Bennett's famous nail cabinet, Paduke cabinet with a bent nail driven into a small central door, and Wendy Maruyama's maple writing desk with purple tenons and a purple scribble on it. I still meet people who tell me that that's the moment that damn magazine went off the rails. However, in last winter, I actually encountered Wendy. Bennett died a few years ago, but I met Wendy at a gallery open in New York, and we had run a lot of letters to the editor critical of this work, and she had just been a student at the time. I asked her how she felt about all those letters. She said, "That's how I knew I was on the right track." So there you go. So Glenn Adamson wrote that we at Fine Woodworking had created the source code for the studio furniture movement. Now, I think what we actually wove was not dead code, but living DNA with strands that included the best of post-war popular mechanics, American period furniture, green woodworking, the arts and crafts movement, Scandinavian modern, traditional Japan, European efficiency, and contemporary studio craft art. It was our common heritage, and we did our best to knot it all together 6 times a year. Okay, end of an era. Fine Woodworking was built on the founders, Paul Roman's conviction that only makers could explain making. So we hired woodworkers and taught them how to be editors and photographers, and we only accepted authors who were themselves makers. This photograph is of a team of makers. We'll see this one again that we had assembled by 1985. And all of a sudden around then, our brand was beset by competition. It forced a change from printing in black and white to full color and needed new skills and a new perspective. And I'd spent 10 years there in the saddle, working really long hours and traveling a lot. And we suffered the transition from typewriters to computers. And we'd made a pretty good magazine, I thought, but I was fried. And they needed me to move on to make room for a new team. And I needed to move on. I had 3 kids. And I needed to do something at a slower pace, of magazine development and book publishing. So that's what I did. So I just love this photo, and we'll see some more of it in a second. Most of these people went on to illustrious careers. Bertorelli succeeded me as editor, and Burroughs succeeded him. David Sloan went on to work at Time Life and Rodale and edited American Woodworker magazine. Mustelli went on to, and Fillion went on to found American Woodturner for the AAW. It had been a newsletter until they took over. Nancy Stabile went on to work at Grolier. Linda Whipke became a realtor. Cummins and Wolf, they're both dead. So that's what happens in 50 years. And that's me over there on the left with my big beard. I don't think I ever wore a suit but that one time in the whole 10 years. So before moving on, I took it all apart to build a series of topical books. The 21-volume Fine Woodworking On series. It was sausage making, you know. We used up everything technical, but we left aside the personality profiles and the exhibition layouts and critical commentaries. We thought that we'd get them into their own book, but that never happened. The series was a big hit and a referendum on what readers wanted most or bought most easily. And the winner by far, which I would not have been able to predict, but looking back it was obvious, was Proven Shop Tips, because it was bite-sized morsels that Jim Ritchie edited and drew. You could read it sitting on the can, you know. It was like everybody would look at it, oh, I could figure that out. But it was great. It was all little light bulbs going off, 144 pages of it. And looking back, though, the unintended consequence of doing this 21-volume series of reprint books was an absolutely endless series of reprint volumes from every woodworking publisher, because we had evergreen information. We could buy it once and get it in print, and then we could sell it over and over and over again. And other publishers in the domain figured that out as well. And I've confessed that in my later years at Fox Chapel, I probably put out 100 books like this from different archives, from American Woodworker and I don't know, a whole bunch of different magazines. Really a plague on the landscape. So, editorial styles. This slideshow, for the first time maybe since 1984, I reviewed all 54 issues of Fine Woodworking that were done under my leadership. I called it the golden black and white years. I turned all 4,000 pages. I reread the letters and select features and skimmed the photos and drawings and the growing volume of ads. And I remembered the sawdust-covered characters that my colleagues and I met, and also the ongoing editorial contradiction. Because early on, we'd taken Scientific American as our editorial model. We understood that shop and tools were what the readers had in common, and we bet that if you got a real boot out of one or two stories, you'd come back for more. And while we did publish a few demonstration projects, we preferred to articles about tools and techniques that were pertinent to many projects, design around the construction, and teach the men to fish. But when growth slowed in 82, 83, and a new team of marketing professionals armed with data came along, they advocated for more beginner projects that readers could build with table saw and router and sander, which meant less of everything else. My editorial philosophy had succeeded in the years when we had the domain to ourselves, and we were surfing the crest of a cultural wave. But in the 80s, beset by new competitors, the wave broke, and the editorial mission had to change. Furniture making is not some outlying thing. It's in some ways at the center of the national conversation, you know. In 78, Robert Whitley visited the White House to measure the Resolute desk so he could duplicate it for the JFK library. And I noticed that I heard that after Elon Musk's kid wiped snot on the Resolute desks, Trump sent it out to be refinished. In 79, Gary Bennett told me how he had felt collected and displayed by Carter's Vice President Mondale and his wife at glittery receptions for when his furniture joined the Smithsonian. And when Carter left Washington in 81, his staff gave him a shop full of woodworking machines. We comped him his Fine Woodworking subscription, and we sent an editor to get the story about his porch swing. In 82, I bought a redwood bench from Bennett. It came with a nicely mounted Polaroid photo up there in the upper right of me with the artist, casually snapped by his partner Sylvia. It felt very special. And later on, I saw a tall stack of identical frames just waiting for their Polaroid pictures. It was a really telling glimpse of professional art business practice, how to stroke up the client, make him feel good. I don't quite know why I put in, oh yeah, I wanted to, my partner Tina, meanwhile, worked at a gallery in Soho in New York that represented Ronnie Wood, the Rolling Stone guitarist. And they put on a special exhibition one time for Bill Clinton and Google ex-chairman Eric Schmidt. I think both of them bought something. So, and in 92, the Windsor chairmaker Michael Dunbar met Trump and urged him to run for president. And ironically, I'm sitting in a Dunbar chair right now as I write these notes. Well, Trump, who is exactly 2 days older than me, seems to favor things that are a lot more carved and gilded. So, second acts. With Fine Woodworking in new hands, I worked to capitalize upon the magazine's original good fortune. I collaborated with Betsy Levine and a powerful team of women to develop Threads magazine, which is still being published. And then I expanded my horizons for 4 years, 88, 92, as publisher of books and videos. And here's some of the things we published in those years. And I learned a lot about the global publishing business and some fundamental truths about publishing, about time and place. Daily newspapers, which serve small localities like cities and states, you can plan them and build them in a week and write them and deliver them in days and hours. Bi-monthly magazines, which serve national audiences, form kind of a square grid in time and space. At any moment, you're working on 6 issues. You know, the one that's going to the printer and the ones that the readers just have and the articles you're developing. You're constantly moving this 6-issue block through time and space. And then I learned that illustrated nonfiction books are planned years ahead and marketed worldwide. But once the author is finished writing and illustrating and hand the manuscript over to us, it's pretty much always exactly 9 months between receiving the manuscript, getting it edited, and in print. So that was very interesting. So the writing was all on the wall, all on the wall, you know, by 92. I can't pretend I wasn't complicit in the effort to reposition Fine Woodworking for a broader audience. I'd stepped back in 92 to help the new editorial team find their way, and I wrote a 4-page story about the bookcases I was making out of 5-quarter lumberyard pine. I thought I was demonstrating the direction we needed to go, and I was just blown away and very amused when one of the new junior editors explained what I was doing wrong and how I could make it better and more elegant, finer. Yeah, okay, I got it. It's time for me to go. I make reliquaries to ease transitions, and I always have. Toshio Odati made a plexiglass case for collecting his own future corpse. It's all dust covered in his living room. In 84, I made a delicate little box using cedar of Lebanon and lignum vitae and spalted maple as a repository for my last pack of cigarettes. You can't open the box. In 1980, I'd planned a new magazine on design and making. The economy slowed, or 1990 rather, and the thumbnail sketch of pages is now inside that little tomb nailed together out of pine. In 1992, in the tumult at Fine Woodworking, with the new team and the new mission coming in, when I stepped in to resume the editorship, I found a year-tall, knee-high stack of unanswered mail, a mountain of ideas that never went anywhere. And we decided we needed to give the new team a clean sweep. I dumped all that mail into a pine casket, glued and screwed it shut, painted it gold, and stashed it in deep storage. So it asks the question, really it begs the question of whether the cosmos of ideas is expanding or contracting. You'll have to open the box to find out, and I have not done that. So early in 92, I'd signed a long-term contract with Taunton Press. Late 92, I stepped out into a stagnant, high unemployment economy. So instead of looking for a job, I began selling freelance editorial services to other publishers, and notably Richard Sorsky at Linden Publishing in Fresno. For quite a few years there, I did almost all of Sorsky's editing and layout work. For you guys, Malcolm Tibbitt's book on segmented woodturning was one of the projects I did. And I also got us into some things that didn't work. In 93, in collaboration with the photographer Ted Spiegel, I wrote a book about contemporary metal sculpture. We hung out at the Talix Foundry in Beacon, New York for a year, watching the modeling and casting of work by big-name artists. But the publishers wanted it to be about art, and we wanted to talk about the technique of metal sculpture. And the artists were happy to talk about tech with us, but they didn't want that stuff told to the world. So it fell apart. In 94, I went to England. I worked with the Guild of Master Craftsmen Publications. The idea was to try US-style subscription marketing and also to establish a US beachhead for their magazines on carving, wood turning, which most of you guys know, and cabinet making. But in truth, I didn't have the skills that were needed, and I confirmed the truism that we are two nations divided by a common tongue. But I sure did love living in southern England. I went back a few years ago, and it was as interesting and beautiful as I remembered. But hey. So in 1995, I became an independent bookseller. I peddled authentic information for woodworkers and furniture makers. We had offices in a small warehouse in Bethel, Connecticut, and we published a 64-page book catalog twice a year with 1,500 pertinent titles listed that we sourced worldwide. We had a traveling bookstore that we set up at 10 wood furniture shows every year, including many AAW and Furniture Society annual conferences. In the upper right is an early setup on tables with marker written signs, and then later is the one below is our much later setup where we had a whole lot of furniture we took and lighting and signage and everything that worked right. It was a great business until 2001 when 9/11 killed off direct mail marketing. And by 2005, Amazon's lower prices and glowing clout had nibbled us to death. I remember very well the reader who said, "Well, we love your catalog. We learned about all these great books, and we got a great price on Amazon." Well, thank you very much. Put me out of business. Uh, it never was an easy business. It was time to move on. It did leave me with a hell of a good home library, though. Book selling had also revealed empty places in the marketplace, in the domain. Let's start our own little publishing company. And we had a pretty good list with it. Lasted. We had books by Stephen Hogman, James Krenov, Ian Kirby, Ken Horner. I'm especially proud of Bob Lang's fine series of shop drawings for craftsman furniture and woodwork. But we had three companies then. We had Cambium Books, Cambium Press. We still had our my editorial business, which my son was working with me doing on the website. It got very complicated. Coming up 2006, coming up on age 60, I'm overextended, I'm exhausted, and I'm divorced. So I sold Cambium Press and folded it into Fox Chapel Publishing in Lancaster, PA, where I went to work as editorial director for a few last years, in which we published some pretty good stuff, especially including David Ellsworth's book on wood turning and I'm losing the names. Another book, a survey book of very adventurous contemporary work. One of the high points of my little publishing career, though, was David Pye. Davis Pye taught us how to think about design and workmanship, how form does not follow function, and how to understand the difference between workmanship of risk and workmanship of certainty, and the importance of leaving workmanlike traces so new detail comes into view at every distance. Hogman had introduced me to Pye's books in '74, and a few years later, traveling for Fine Woodworking, I visited Pye, who died in '93. And in '95, I met David Herbert of the Herbert Press. We got together and published a joint transatlantic new edition of both books. Today, the meaty Mortise and Tenon magazine still debates Pye's ideas, and Christopher Schwartz at Lost Arts Press continues to pursue old ways of working wood and of thinking about it. Conceptually, these are our direct descendants. And I recently learned that the international publishers Bloomsbury now has the rights to Pye and plans new editions for next year. They're trying to find a way to re-illustrate the books, which strikes me as folly, but anyway, they're going to do it. I formed a partnership with Ian Kirby for a few years. He was one of my teachers. He had a remarkable education and skill set grounded in British arts and crafts. But on his own, he was impenetrable and wordy to an extreme degree. I could tease readable prose out of him, and I could photograph and help illustrate the projects and skills he demonstrated. These are some of the books we did. Making Joints from the Mastering Woodworking series that Rodale had done still stands as a terrific textbook, and it's kind of too bad it's out of print. I don't know who has the rights anymore. Maybe Kirby does. I kept my own hand in making furniture for my own home and the homes of my children and for our business offices. I was strongly influenced by Krenov. I like to show off the wood figure and to combine unusual elements. And I'm glad I never did go into the woodworking or furniture business. I might have lost my love of making, just as I did lose my love of writing. From '98 to 2001, working closely with Rick Mistelli and Deborah Fillion and the furniture scholars Ned Cook and Glenn Adamson, we tried to define studio furniture through a groundbreaking pair of books, the first two furniture studio books. And then over the next 5 years, the Furniture Studio and its many generous donors sponsored 3 more new books in the series in collaboration with their committee members and the designer Maura Zimmer. I don't quite remember why the series foundered. I think we were not hitting the mark, and I think the funding dried up for it as well. Anyway, those 3, there's some pretty interesting stuff in those books. Not a lot of wood turning, but a lot of very interesting furniture. And I wrote a few books on my own. I did the Woodworking Today, Dramatic Evolution was the AAW's 25th anniversary book. It was a 3-year project for me. It contains a terrific essay by Steve Lohr, carrying on from where Yale left off with their exhibition about wood turning in North America since 1930. I wrote a book on birdhouses, which I was sold through Sterling. It made a lot of money. I never made any money on it. I just got paid, well, no royalties. And I did a book on woodworking for kids. We meant this originally for the Boy Scouts and for those little, what do they call them, soapbox racer, pine wood derby. It did very well. This also did very well. And on a more personal note, I remarried at home in 2010 to my darling wife Tina. At the time, I was 64 and she was 58. Second time around for us both. That's our wedding picture right there. So when I was a little kid, my dad had a weekly newspaper. He said all the type by hand, letter by letter. Then he got a linotype machine. They tore open the shop wall to get it in, and with that he could compose and cast complete lines in hot metal. Linotypes were still in general use when I was at university, but Fine Woodworking was entirely photoset, and publications like Furniture Matters and Wood Turning Fundamentals are entirely digital. You can print them out, but they don't exist in the solid world from a business perspective. Digital typesetting and printing meant that anybody with a laptop could handle the whole process. And some people thought that meant you could do without editors and other gatekeepers. But as we now see in unmoderated social media, not so much. On the woodworking side, it went from homemade shopsmiths to radial arm saws, table saw, to compound miter chop saw, and the saw stop, and track saws, and now CNC routers and 3D printers. So I turned 50 in 96 with the internet rising, and by 2000 everybody had a computer and CNC technology was filtering down to small shops. And when I turned 60 in 2006, and by now anybody with a laptop can publish books and videos and podcasts, and if you want to print them, you can print them on demand. Publishing and woodworking had completely changed. I'm a dinosaur. So what do? I go boating. Ocean or lake or river, I've always lived near or on or near the water. I live on the river now. And paddling a small boat, especially one you built yourself, like the canoe sold here, is absolutely exhilarating. One of the best experiences in life. Almost as good as sex. In 2010, when I retired, I didn't want to write anymore. It was time to make things, so I returned to wood turning. I got a small lathe, and I had a lot of fun investigating the expressive potential of basic spindles. I was interested in the shapes the tools made and in the spaces in between these things. In 2013, there was an exhibition in New York of Magritte's paintings, and I learned that Magritte was also highly inspired by what he called billboquettes, turnings like these that represented people. The one with the egg and the birdcage up there was a very early example of it, and later on these things turned up throughout Magritte's work. Billboquette was a ball and spindle toy that often featured in naughty French postcards. Anyway, I found it absolutely fascinating the way Magritte used these things, and I visited the show in New York several times to soak it in, and I even tried to make copies of the billboquettes and the paintings in cherry wood. I tried to make them so you could tell men from women in them and make them different sizes and with different shapes. And as always, I'm interested in the spaces in between them as much as in the shapes themselves. I did a lot of figurative work, and I have done a lot of figurative work. I'm always very happy to understand how little it takes to make a wood turned or a simple wooden object represent people. And these are some of the things from my own past. Turnings and joinery samples, and I don't know, you see what's going on here. To me, these are all representations of men and women. My kids had these little Fisher-Price plug toys, plug people. They were so stupidly simple and yet so very, very expressive. And I tried to understand that and use that concept. 2013, I joined the ITE, the International Turning Exchange, for an 8-week session in Philadelphia in the summertime. It was an intensive immersion at UArts, and it gave me a glimpse of the working life in the furniture making fork in the road that I had not taken. And in the middle of that summer, my younger brother Robin, also a woodworker, photographer, and writer, died at age 64. That was summer 2013. That was the summer I made this folding table, which is in my living room. We never folded. It just, anyway, three-legged folding table using a 4-bar linkage kind of mechanism. I did a lot with the 4-bar linkage. Here's a little, I'm going to click this little video so it'll play while I'm talking. I got really interested in this mechanism. I've shown it to you guys before. My tool cabinet. I made a lot of workshop furniture. And I think that mechanism has tremendous furniture potential, an all wood up, very sturdy folding shelf, but I'm probably not going to exploit it any further. I also got interested in bamboo, 2015-16. I have a clump of it in my backyard, and it moves and sighs like an animal in the wind. And I tried to learn how to make stuff with it. I actually figured it out, what you had to do. You got to bundle it up and turn wood plugs for joints. Dowels and zip ties will only get you so far. The local authorities consider bamboo aggressively invasive, but Toshio said I was really lucky to have a lovely green bamboo to play with, and I think he was right. I also make these things, Platonic polyhedra using rare earth magnets. Absolutely fascinated by the tensegrity mass that Kenneth Snelson made. I don't know how to make those. I've tried a number of times. But I make these other things. What do you call them anyway? Platonic solids, using rods with magnets embedded in the ends and spherical rare earth magnets. I've made a lot of these, and these things turn up over and over in my work. I also like to make practical tableware. These pieces are all, I like to see them give stuff away and see it in people's homes. I do not like to sell work. I don't want to measure out my time, but I do like other people to have my work. So these are 3 examples of sets of things that I've made and given away to close friends. I love to see the stuff when I go to visit them. I see my stuff in their houses. Beverly actually has used the chalice and paten in services she conducts. And I got heavily into working with the sphericon, a twisted double cone, a geometric investigation, building on the work of David Springett. I go in deep enough to turn inverse and hollow sphericons. And in 2018, while I was making sphericons, I was diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer, same as Biden has. The prostate gland is kind of shaped like a sphericon, and these things took on a mystic significance. And when I gave a white ash sphericon box to a local shaman named Cougar, he handled it with gloves and tongs, and he burned it and buried the ash deep in the woods. Didn't cure. Well, maybe it did. I don't know. I'm still alive. You can take a lot of meds to keep cancer at bay. The ugly plastic bottles stinking of disease always offended me. Sent me on a years-long investigation of turned jars and urns and pocket pillboxes. Early on, I had tried and failed to cut wooden threads, so I turned instead to magnets embedded in the wood, which you all know about. As Chester Gould proclaimed atop the Dick Tracy comic strip, the nation that controls magnetism controls the universe. I don't know about that, but I sure enjoy the magnetic boxes work that I've done. Collaborations. I really enjoy collaborations. I've done a lot of them. This is an example of my harmonic honograph table. Original one was built with Lawrence Souder over there on the left. On the right, you can see it working in this little short video. You know, as you get older, your horizons narrow, but friendly collaborations like these to make something clever with and for a friend, that's a ton of fun. It's probably a peak experience, really. I'm always up for a good collaboration on a woodworking project, and I have a lot of friends who've come to make things in my shop over the years, and I take a lot of pleasure in doing that with them. I got drawn back into it in the 2010s period. After that AAW book of 2011, I did a series of reprint books for them. And then I did the Explorer utility that you still see on their website. Did all the Dave Mueller did the software work, and I did the actual coding of the of the stuff to where it fit into the database. And then I got drawn into Wood Turning Fundamentals, which we tried to make into a real magazine as opposed to the kind of newsletter it had been. I did that for 2 years. And I found that with my advancing illness, I could no longer guarantee to meet deadlines, so I had to put the project down. And that was also fun while it lasted, though. I thought they could have done very, very well in the marketplace if they'd actually printed it and sold it, but they never did. So on the upper left, you can see Bradford pear trees, 4 of them forming an arch. And that's my house in the arch there in the center of the arch and way in the distance of the photograph. And on the right are 5 pear wood urns I've made from some of the Bradford pear that came down. They're funerary urns. They all have a patch of bark and cambium layer on the outside. What I like about Bradford pear is it turns beautifully. It doesn't have a really strong figure, but has a lot of subtle color, and it holds detail absolutely beautifully. The authorities consider it highly invasive and problematic, but I find it great to turn. And everybody needs a set of funerary urns, don't they? And where I live, frankly, by the way, is on old maps is shown as Zook's Corner. Over on the upper left, there's a bookcase containing my archive, hundreds of books and thousands of pages and hundreds of thousands of illustrations and millions of words. It amounts to 10 feet of compressed wood paper. And on the right is my deck, 118 turned balusters resembling caryatids out of cypress for the handrails. When I look back on it all, it is one hell of a mountain of stuff. But in the day, you just send the current job off to press, and then you turn to the next job and the next. And it's exactly the same with wood turning multiples, as Richard Raffin once explained to me. Raffin, who's getting the AAW's Lifetime Award this year. You don't set out to turn 100 of anything. You just turn one, and then you turn another. So in COVID isolation, after testing live video setups in my basement shop, Lancaster Woodturners installed a 3-camera live video Zoom setup and committed to the hybrid meeting format. And I'm very proud of that. Our club grew in that time in COVID from 40 members to more than 100, which to me proved the concept. And since April 2020, as most of you know, I've been moderating and hosting this weekly Thursday morning Woodturners Coffee Hour on Zoom. And you can see my videos on YouTube. Just search John Kelsey Artisan. You'll find all of the coffee hour videos going back to number 28. And I couldn't let you go without a glimpse of my own basement workshop. It's centered on the lathe, supported by a chop saw, bandsaw, and planer. I got rid of the table saw many years ago. It took up too much space, and it was mostly table and not much saw. I've got a lot of wood and turning billets, and I remember another of Frid's dictums, you have to get ahead on your wood, you got to get ahead on your wood, which I've done, I think. I've always had a workshop, except for 3 years when I moved 3 times in 3 years. I moved the wood along with the tools, but I didn't really have anywhere to do anything until for that block of time. I've had about 12 workshops in my life, starting from the electronics bench I built in the attic when I was a kid in 1961, through basements and garages and one time a stairwell, to my current 1,200 square feet of heated basement with 8-foot ceilings, its own electrical panel, and double doors direct to the outside. It's excellent shop space. It's what sold me on the house. In 2014, the workshop was what we moved here first, so we could make stuff for setting up the new house, of course. And today my workshop really centers on my robust lathe with standard size lathe and my wood turning tool cabinet. The chop saw bench in the background of both photos is just mostly covered with the current crop of turning blanks that I'm looking at. What am I going to make next out of this one? I make a lot of magnet boxes. It keeps it fun for me. There's a little video of them I'm going to let go. I like to make them with hidden magnets, radial-oriented hidden magnets. So they open easily with a twist and they close with a click. The wood figure all lines up, and visitors to my shop often ask to buy one, but I won't sell them. I give them away in exchange for a photo. I just won't measure out my workshop projects in hours and dollars. I just can't do it. And if I was to do that, these things would be priced out of the market anyway. But right now they're priceless. All you have to do to get one is come see me in my shop. Fine Woodworking turns 50 this year. Roman died in 24 and the family sold it to Active Interest Media, which also publishes the competitor Popular Woodworking. There's no office anymore. The staff all works from home. The magazine's 50 years old. It is still dense with exploded drawings and photo sequences and router and table saw projects and techniques. There's hardly any quirky byways into adjacent woodcrafts, and not hardly any personality interviews, and hardly any delightful surprises. So to my eye, it's all been sanded smooth and highly polished. It's not very interesting. But it's, on the other hand, in an age when new media is rapidly devouring old, it still exists as a bi-monthly magazine. So I got to hand it to them. They've kept it going. My 3 kids are also turning 50. And back in those fine woodworking days when I traveled and worked late a lot, my kids took the heat. They came through it pretty good, though. In this photo, that's Morgan on the left, me in the middle, my son Ted, my daughter Jennifer. If you want to stick around, I'll show you grandchildren photos too. I've got 5 of those. Morgan has a degree in music, a career in web tech, and now he's a one-man workshop building very fine guitars in his home in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts. He knows the physics underlying music, and he plays the piano every day, and his own experimental music gigs show up on social media as Morgan the Cat Mom. And where I would joint an edge with my long plane, Morgan feeds it to his CNC machine. My son Ted caught the family writing gene. He's published 2 young adult novels based on bedtime stories he'd told his daughter. And he works as curriculum director for a group of technical colleges. His work includes building textbooks for such subjects as HVAC and diesel mechanics. Ted is very home handy. He knows 3D printing, and he also knows how to ask queries of the AI software that won't give you hallucinatory answers. My daughter has a degree in literature. She reads all the time. She's a spreadsheet whiz, and she easily grasps technical information. Back in the 2000s, she worked for me as a publishing back office. She also worked in Reader's Digest circulation and Scholastic book sales. Then she moved into industrial sales, working from home. So I enjoy seeing aspects of my own lifelong skills and interests being reflected back in the lives of my grown children. They've all become very, very fine independent adults. So my mother was a teacher, my son was a teacher, my grandson is a teacher. I never wanted to be a teacher, but writing and editing are a kind of teaching, and magazine management mostly meant hiring, teaching, and mentoring staff. Last week I put this chart together to show how my late 20th century life and career fit into the domain of woodworking and print periodicals, where my mentees went, and how that all fit around studio furniture. And I know you can't see much here on this slide, but you're always free to pause the video that I'm going to post after this and play around with this diagram if you want to. And if it really interests you, I'll send you a PDF. But that's my life in the middle in the blue band, and that's my mentees all springing off in the middle, next band down below, and up above in the orange colors is the world at large, and then down below at the bottom, all in white, is the surrounding domain of print publications. I think the key point here is the McLuhan quote. I was a student in '67, and McLuhan was a big deal, and I still consider him a prophet of the new era. He said new media, electric technologies cannibalize the old. And since media are extensions of ourselves, that means that they're in fact cannibalistic, eating people. And to survive, one must study the habits of cannibals. Keep on talking, it comes down to me. I live in Lancaster County by the Conestoga River. This is now playing off the time and place theme of the furniture conference. With my wife Tina and our handsome cat, Tato, our land slopes down to the river. We've got mature pin oak, white ash, black walnut, English walnut, forest cherry, Bradford pear, sycamore, and mulberry. The ash tree, Yggdrasil, rises up through our deck from the center of the 7 realms to stand guard over our little house. We live in a meadow forest community with its own intelligence and intentions, season upon season. And I take great pleasure in studying the trees and how the amazing things that they do over the course of a year. We think trees are passive, just standing there, but what they do in the months of April and May is just absolutely mind-blowing. The amount of material they put out, the amount of pollen and flowers and leaves and new growth and consolidation through the summer and repeat it all again next year. And we keep Yggdrasil there happy by injecting him every other year with whatever poison that Bartlett sells to keep the emerald ash borer at bay. We'll keep that ash tree going as long as we possibly can. The big black walnut on the hillside, people say, oh, you should prune this tree. It's really growing out of bounds. And of course, that's the last thing I'm going to do. The tree commands the hillside. It can have all the sunshine it wants. So I'm an early riser. I like to see the sun come up. I learned in middle school that when I had an early morning paper route and my dad worked the overnight shift, we'd both get home about the same time and have breakfast together. My dad is much on my mind because I'm now older than he was at the end. And the sun has risen 28,868 times in my 79 years. It's a long life, and I've got to be grateful for every morning that Tato and I see the old man peep up over the eastern horizon outside our breakfast window. And I take the Woodward Tarot card as emblematic in that. I don't know if the guy in the card is watching the sunrise or the sunset, but I'll take it either way. So the award of distinction. When a cultural moment sweeps by, you can catch the wind and ride it, but you mustn't imagine that you created the moment. Actually, the moment creates you. And it's true that only makers can properly explain the process of making. It's also true that you can't bang out quality books and magazines all by yourself. It takes time and a team. So I'm grateful to be receiving the award of distinction, and in accepting, I'm representing a legion of woodmaking soldiers in the trenches of ink, craft artisans and writers like these fine woodworking platoon, this fine platoon of people for the work we did 50 years ago and still ongoing. And thank you very much to the Furniture Society, and thank you very much to you all for indulging me in my slideshow. Now I'm going to see if I can end the share. There we go. And I see I haven't killed you all off.
This sounds like a good base for another book, John.
Who'd want to read it?
You know, John, the thing I love the most about your story is it's somewhat like mine in that as I look back on my career, many things almost seem like happenstance that they occurred and then they become such critical changes in the direction.
That just shows you were also riding a cultural moment. You see, the moment creates you. You don't create it, and you find yourself faced with stuff that the universe throws at you, and oh, what am I going to do now? Any other comments? We're way over time. We never go over time.
That was really enlightening. I started out with Fine Woodworking. I started out looking at woodworking during early days of Fine Woodworking magazine. And I liked that it had so many different things, but I also didn't like because I didn't know what direction to take. It confused me a little. So one question I had for you though is through this all, what regrets do you have?
Regrets? Oh, you got another hour? I'll tell you what regrets I have, and I won't detail it. I'm a pretty good platoon leader, but I've also been brutal to people, and I'm a terrible employee. I'm a much better freelancer than an employee, and every employer I ever had will agree with that. And I regret that I wasn't a better employee.
I actually can see that.
Anybody else?
Yeah, John, really enjoyable listening to your story. Very well done. Really appreciate it. Back in the 70s, I was an original subscriber, and I enjoyed it. I hung on to it for I don't know how many years, and I kept all the issues. I don't know where they are now, having moved around the country several times, but you've done a great job. And I certainly appreciate what you created with the coffee hour, how you started that and got into the technology and how you have evolved. Very, very nice.
Well, I'll tell you something about all those back issues, you know. One time I was at a magazine professional publishing event, and I was having lunch at a table with Wendell Garrett, who at the time was the editor of National Geographic. And his wife told about when they just recently moved house and he had to move this enormous stack of fine woodworking. I thought, yes, poetic justice.
John, I just wanted to say that I'm you may be a lousy employee, but you are a wonderful teacher and you're also an inspiration. And I'm very, very privileged to have been both a participant in those early days and a bystander for the rest of your career. And I count myself very fortunate to have had you as a mentor and a teacher and a friend.
Well, thank you, David. You know, you ought to do a slideshow of this yourself on your own career. You've had a hell of a remarkable trajectory in your life.
My memory is not as good as yours, John.
Well, mine wasn't either. I couldn't. I had to really work at this to get it all in a row. It took some time to figure it out.
Well, it's nice to lay it out. You know, I always joke that when my kids say, "What did you do, Dad?" and I point to this pile of paper and say, "Right there, all those magazines." But what you've done is you've actually put it down and marked your career so that somebody can come along and see what you've accomplished without having to go through that pile of paper.
Yeah, I just wonder if anybody gives a damn besides my friends and family.
That's
Probably
enough,
not.
isn't it?
I guess it's enough. It has to be.
Yeah, no, John, it's having created a history of the media, and I think is very, very important. And your knowledge and the people that you've met, I mean, it's great hearing about them. I mean, I've learned a lot, and just, you know, I've never met them, but I have through you. So yeah, no, I think it's great that you've done this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to
Anybody?
thank you as well from Germany. A lot of the books that you showed in your presentation published by Fine Woodworking found their way to Germany as well. I must own 12 or 15 of these books. So thanks a lot for that. That was kind of the first time we met through publishing. And then I really enjoyed the morning coffee hour. And I remember when we started something similar in Germany during COVID, that you helped us get started with Zoom and these Zoom meetings for woodturners. So this was really great, and I want to thank you a lot for both, for your publishing work and also for the morning coffee hour and for the help you gave us. Thanks a lot.
You know, that was kind of my fault too. You know, I used to go to the Frankfurt Book Fair every year to try and sell our books to German publishers. The German publishers were our best shot. They were the ones who most closely understood what we were up to. But, you know, I have to tell you, one time I had a book I was trying to sell to a German publisher. It was a book about trim carpentry. And I'd gone on raving about what a great book it was and how well it would do in Germany. And he looked at me and he didn't quite take a monocle out of his eye, but he might have. And he said, "But why would anyone want to do this?"
I have to say, I bought a lot of books at the Frankfurt Book Fair as well, because at the time when I got interested in books on woodworking, there wasn't much on the German market. The
Yeah.
English-speaking publishers were far ahead of Germany. And we didn't have Amazon at that time, so it wasn't that easy to get or to buy English books or American books in Germany. So I went to the last day of the Frankfurt Book Fair, and some of the publishers, including Taunton Press for a while, they sold their books even at a reduced price that they had exhibited at the Frankfurt Book Fair. So I bought a lot of books there, and later on, when Amazon was there, I ordered them through Amazon.
Well, you probably actually bought some of them from me, actually, because we didn't want to ship those books home. We couldn't carry them home in our luggage, so let's get a few bucks on them.
Yeah, maybe. I didn't know you then.
No, I didn't recognize you either.
But it was a good time, or it still is a good time. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and the Frankfurt Fair was terrific. And for me, it was you go to the publishing industry in general in those years, you know, Frankfurt was always in the fall, late October usually, and the whole publishing industry would take a week or two off either before or after Frankfurt to be in Europe, you know. My own habit was I'd go to the Frankfurt Fair and then take the train to Paris or take the train to Amsterdam or go somewhere else in Europe from Frankfurt. It was a terrific way to do a little time off after some pretty hard work. The book fair was grueling, and also, frankly, an infection. Everybody had a cold by the time the thing was over. Just to set.
Well, that's Germany.
Yeah. Anybody else?
So, John, what's next? I want to hear what's coming up. What's
next? Jesus, I don't know. I'm just going to keep on making magnet boxes myself. You younger people are going to do what's next. I have no idea. Maybe on that note, we're all done for today.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Signing off.
Thank you, John. Very interesting.
That was awesome, John.
Thank you all very much. I really enjoyed having this opportunity to show this slideshow to somebody besides my wife. So thank you very much.
It was exceptional, John. Thanks so much.
Thank you. You put together a great group of people.
Yeah, you guys are the great group of people. That's for sure. Anyway, thanks. I'm gonna click us all off now. Bye.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Wood shop. Thank God for wood.